On Friends on Times Radio.
Across the UK, on DAB digital radio, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio, the voice of the Times.
It's 6 o'clock. I'm John Pienaar. Welcome to Pienaar and Friends. Tonight, that is Kate Ferguson from The Sun on Sunday and Mikey Smith from the Mirror. And you, I'm very happy to say, send us your thoughts, text, tweet, voice note. If you want to do that, always glad to get them. And we can all chat after the news with Laura Cook.
Thank you. Good evening. 2 children have been killed and 17 people injured at a primary school shooting in Minneapolis. The gunman in his early 20s died from self-inflicted wounds. The shooting took place only one day after pupils returned from their summer break. President Trump has been briefed and said the White House would monitor this terrible situation. Dina Winter is Minneapolis City Hall reporter for the Star Tribune and told Times Radio what's been happening.
There have been parents, as you can imagine, coming to the school all morning to get their children, see if their children are okay, holding their hands very tightly, and just a terrible situation. The school just started this Monday. Most people are going back to school right now in America, and so this is just your worst nightmare. It's so hard to let your kid go to school.
The city's mayor, Jacob Frey, described the shooting as an act of evil.
These were American families, and the amount of pain that they are suffering right now is extraordinary. And don't just say this is about thoughts and prayers right now. These kids were literally praying. It was the first week of school. They were in a church. These are kids that should be learning with their friends. They should be playing on the playground. They should be able to go to school or church in peace without the fear or risk of violence, and their parents should have the same kind of assurance.
Nigel Farage appears to have softened Reform's stance on immigration, saying his deportation plans won't include women and children at this stage. He did say, though, that if a single woman comes to Britain, they'll be detained and deported. Political opponents have accused him of a U-turn after yesterday announcing everyone arriving on small boats would be deported under a government led by him. Meanwhile, Conservative MSP Graham Simpson has defected to Reform, though admits it was a wrench to do so. Tommy Robinson will not be charged over an alleged assault at St Pancras railway station in London last month. The Crown prosecution says its service says it's because there was not a realistic prospect of conviction. The Kremlin has reiterated a long-standing view that Russia will not accept NATO troops in Ukraine as part of European security guarantees, while saying US efforts to find peace in Ukraine are very important. Spokesperson Dmitry Peskov added Moscow took a negative view on European proposals for security guarantees for Ukraine. Households are being urged to consider switching to fixed deals after a bigger than expected hike in energy bills ahead of the winter. Ofgem's announced its price cap will rise by 2% in October, costing the typical home an extra £35 a year. Times Business News editor John Rees explains why this is happening.
And two of the main drivers for that is an increase in electricity balancing costs, which is when the National Energy System Operator works to keep Britain's lights on by balancing supply and demand in real time. The other is from the increase in the warm home discount, and that is we'll see 2.7 million more people join that scheme, slightly more than 6 million people on it at the moment, and that is to lop about £150 off the annual energy bills for those people who are less able to afford it.
US Ryder Cup captain Keegan Bradley has named his 12-player team but hasn't selected himself in his captain's picks. Ahead of next month's tournament, he's gone for Justin Thomas, Colin Morikawa, tournament debutant Ben Griffin, fellow rookie Cameron Young, Patrick Cantlay and Sam Burns. They'll join the 6 automatic qualifiers for the event against Team Europe at Bethpage Black in New York. He spoke of his difficult decision.
I grew up wanting to play Ryder Cups. I grew up wanting to fight alongside these guys. And it broke my heart not to play, really did, because, you work forever to make these teams. But ultimately, I was chosen to do a job. I was chosen to be the captain of this team.
And for a news bulletin when you want it, search for the Times News Briefing on the Times Radio app.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. John Pienaar at Drive on Times Radio.
It is good to have you with us here on Pienaar and Friends, an hour of good conversation in always very good company. Tonight, no exception, because we've got Kate Ferguson from The Sun on Sunday. Hello, Kate.
Hello.
And Mikey Smith. What a pair, the Deputy Political Editor at The Mirror. Hi, Mikey.
Hello.
Mikey, what's your thought for the day?
My thought for the day is poor old Ed Davey. Is my thought for the day. So there's a poll that's come out, been done by YouGov, just come out this afternoon, where they almost cruelly went around the public and showed them photographs of politicians and asked them to identify them. This is something I do for fun on videos for the Mirror sometimes.
Yeah.
But they've done it for an actual poll, data and everything. So as you might expect, Keir Starmer does pretty well. He's I think it's 97% managed to identify him. Nigel Farage about the same. Kemi Badenoch got 62% people identified here, which you might think is bad for someone who wants to be the next Prime Minister, but I think that's probably not that bad for Kemi Badenoch.
That's higher than I would have thought.
Yeah. The problem,
what's the
problem comes when you get to Ed Davey, because only after how many years has he been leader of the Lib Dems? Only 37% of people could correctly identify Ed Davey.
Yes, yes.
And even among Lib Dem voters, 35% of Lib Dem voters could not correctly identify Ed Davey.
That is a wow, isn't it?
It's rough.
Yeah. So what was the figure overall?
37% could identify him.
And the same percentage of Lib Dem voters?
35% of Lib Dem voters couldn't.
Couldn't. Oh, I see. I thought you meant could.
Still,
yeah. Did they have him in like a surf suit, or was it a suit, or was it an actually lounge suit that confused people?
Upside down on a bungee rope.
Exactly.
That might have helped.
He needs to get out on a canoe, doesn't he? Or
he does.
Slide down something.
Gosh, after all that TV exposure during the campaign,
he needs to go on Strictly, really.
Yeah. And Liberal Dems always used to take a kind of weird, perverse delight in not doing very well in some ways. I mean, I can recall numbers of different periods when you could fit them all in a taxi cab. That's not true now. There's quite a few of them down at Westminster. But they used to have this lovely sort of gung-ho spirit. You know, not enough people love us, and we do care, but we'll live with it. We'll keep on. We'll sing together at the Glee Club at the Liberal Party conference. I sort of couldn't help loving them for that. And I can see almost a glimmer of affection in your face, Kate.
Oh no, that's not what you're seeing. No shade on the Lib Dems. I'm sure there's many Lib Dem listeners, but I've actually never been to a Lib Dem party conference.
Have you not?
No. So it's one of the omissions of my career as a lobby reporter. You always got sent to either UKIP or Lib Dem, and I'm afraid I was always seen as more of a UKIP girl. God, goodness knows why, John.
They were a lovely bunch of people.
I never did Glee Club.
Well, no, I don't necessarily recommend that. I mean, it's a long time since I ever put my head around the door of a Glee Club at a Liberal Party conference. But
You're a good singer, though, John. You could give them a run for their money.
Well, back in the day, yeah, that is. I think that was almost true. But they were famously drunken. They went on pretty much. Have you ever been to one of those, Mikey?
Many times. Yeah. And they
someone
get
called it the seedy underbelly of the Liberal Democrats.
About the time I stopped going to Lib Dem conference, this wasn't why. I just got moved on to other things. But
too much Glee Club.
I started to think that I feel like Glee Club is sometimes a little bit mean-spirited, and I kind of lost the shine.
What do you mean?
I don't know. That some of the songs are a little bit. I know that they're sung with love, but some of them feel a little bit cruel.
Do you think so? I never felt that. I thought as a kind of they self-satirise quite a lot. They take the mick out of themselves and each other.
True.
Whereas at other party conferences, I mean, well, at the Conservative Party conference, with due respect to them, spend a lot of time when they ever get together and party and sing. It's at the expense of the other parties, at the expense of their opponents rather than themselves.
Mikey, are you saying the Lib Dem, you're more woke than the Lib Dems?
Often, yes.
Gosh. in the wokeometer.
Sometimes.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know. I just thought it was. I felt like it's a little bit out of character for their, character as a party.
Yeah, but at least you could pick Ed Davey out of a lineup. That is true. That is something. Katie, what's your?
Well, actually, because you're talking about singing, maybe this is just a segue to talk about Taylor Swift. Obviously announced she's getting married. There's a new kind of first lady of America, isn't there? Aren't they the new first couple? I mean, Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce are probably more popular than any president, I suspect, including Donald Trump. But I think this is a nice ending to her her kind of long documented various love stories. I'm quite sad she didn't end up with a British fella because she's dated so many.
Was that ever a possibility?
But yeah, John.
I don't know. I mean,
have you not followed Taylor Swift's love life?
I sadly no.
Not every twist and turn. Yes, well, her last two main boyfriends were both boys.
Boys? I sort of took that for granted. I thought you said Brits.
English boys, Brits.
Oh, yeah.
I meant Brits. I meant Brits. Anyway, so I think this is good news, isn't it? It's so dreary in the news at the moment. So I think it's quite nice that finally America's kind of sweetheart has got her fairy tale ending.
But what's she going to do for material now?
Well, this is true because, John, I don't know if you know this, but Taylor Swift writes most of her music about men that have left her heartbroken.
Well, I know that now because I've been talking about it on the show. It took that.
So you're not really a Swiftie?
I'm not an anti-Swiftie. I mean, I think she sounds good. I mean, if I say anything critical, I'm probably going to get a lot of unwanted commentary. I mean, she can't dance, can she? I mean, she cannot dance.
No, but as Mikey was saying, the Lib Dems poke fun at themselves. She pokes fun at herself, so she knows she can't really dance. She just, lets herself go because
she looks very likeable.
Yeah,
I'm sure that's a great comfort to her.
Yeah, okay. Well, we can all say congratulations, Taylor Swift.
Congrats,
Mrs. The diamond
Swift
looks good.
Yeah,
right.
Totally.
Okay.
Right. Okay. Well, there's a good thought for the day. Now, look, it's 6:11. I want to hear what you're thinking about the news today. Most of it has not been happy, to put it mildly. First of all, guys, I want to go from what was a fairly happy conversation to one which is not. The awful news out of Minneapolis, developing during the course of the afternoon. We have, of course, been covering the shooting in Minneapolis, where the government targeted a mass at that Catholic church, which was attached to a school. And we've got 2 children killed. We've got 7 children in critical condition. 4 of those kids needed operations. It is so grim. The Minneapolis police chief, he spoke to the media earlier on, and he said it marked the first day back at school.
During the mass, a gunman approached on the side of the building, and began firing a rifle through the church windows towards the children sitting in the pews at the mass. Shooting through the windows, he struck children and worshipers that were inside the building. The shooter was armed with a rifle, a shotgun, and a pistol. This was a deliberate act of violence against innocent children and other people worshiping. The sheer cruelty and cowardice of firing into a church full of children is absolutely incomprehensible.
That is Police Chief Brian O'Hara, and this was a man who witnessed what had happened and described it.
We live about 2 blocks from here. I was on a call. All the windows of our home were open. I know what gunfire sounds like, and I could tell. I was shocked. I said, there's no way that could be gunfire. There was so much of it. So it was sporadic. It was a semi-automatic. It seemed like a rifle. It certainly didn't sound like a handgun. And so he must have reloaded, several times for sure.
Do you remember about how many gunshots?
I'll just say maybe 30 to 50 to, somewhere in that area.
Now, the city mayor is Jacob Frey.
These were American families. And the amount of pain that they are suffering right now is extraordinary. And don't just say this is about thoughts and prayers right now. These kids were literally praying. It was the first week of school. They were in a church. These are kids that should be learning with their friends. They should be playing on the playground. They should be able to go to school or church in peace without the fear or risk of violence, and their parents should have the same kind of assurance.
And we have this update from one of Minnesota's hospitals, the Hennepin County Medical Center.
The one today, we received a total of 11 patients from this incident. 2 of them were adult patients, 9 pediatric patients. 4 of them required the operating room. And up to this point in time, there have been no fatalities related to any of those patients that were brought to our organization.
And I spoke to the City Hall reporter in Minneapolis for the Star Tribune.
Parents, as you can imagine, coming to the school all morning to get their children, see if their children are okay. And so there's been, all morning just parents picking up their children, holding their hands very tightly, and, a lot of, just a terrible situation. The school just started this Monday, and all of us, most people are going back to school right now in America. And so this is just your worst nightmare.
Well, amen to all of that, Kate and Mikey. I'm not sure there's much that we can usefully add to this at this particular point, except to say another school shooting in the United States, another awful story from this side of the Atlantic. It just looks, well, I suppose incomprehensible is the right word. Although we know some of the influences and the arguments, still to us it just seems so odd and alien.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to comprehend something as appalling as this. A gunman going in and targeting primary school kids in a church at mass at their church pews. It feels incomprehensible. When I heard news of this latest school shooting, and there are sadly so many school shootings in America, it feels like, it reminded me of a conversation I had last year with an American guy I randomly met, and he's an architect and he builds schools, and he was telling me how the schools he builds now are designed so that you can escape from classrooms if there is a school shooting. Wow. So basically, they're so commonplace in America now that schools are being explicitly architecturally designed so you can sort of bring down the shutters and kind of partition parts of the schools so you keep as many kids safe as possible, yes. Which I think really highlights just how appallingly widespread this threat and danger is. Yes. The fact that the very fabric of the schools kids are sent into every day to learn has to now kind of accommodate and deal with the threat of gun violence is appalling. Yeah, although when we talk about crime in this country, it is always worth bearing in mind, just look across the Atlantic, and that just gives you a little bit of context in as far as that is useful and helpful. Exactly. We just do not have that level of gun crime. You do not have that level of availability of guns. You do. I mean, it sounds like here it was a rifle and a shotgun. They have entire gun fairs where you can pick up semi-automatic weapons. Yeah. It's that kind of availability of deadly, lethal weapons designed to take out many people in the course of just a few seconds. It's incomprehensible to this country, and I'm glad it isn't comprehensible to us. Mikey, you're a parent. Mm-hmm. You don't have to be a parent for this to really hit home, but it does.
No, it definitely does. It's as the woman said in that clip, it's every parent's worst nightmare, because you suddenly realise exactly how vulnerable your child is every day when you leave them at school or at nursery or whatever. I think Kate's right. I think at some point you would hope that America would have some kind of reckoning. We thought this would happen after Sandy Hook, after Columbine. You would think someone would wonder why America has school shootings in a volume that no other country in the world does. And yet we had... I listened last night to Donald Trump in a cabinet meeting saying it should be easier to carry weapons in public because it's a defence against someone else with a weapon. Well, these kids weren't going to be carrying weapons, and I doubt any of them would have been defending themselves against a guy shooting through the window.
Yeah, the argument that says that teachers should be rooting the armed in the classroom.
Yeah, I mean,
as you say, different culture, different country. I'm going to move on. We've got more to talk about here on Pienaar and Friends on Times Radio.
Kate Ferguson on Times Radio.
Prepare for a lively mix of illuminating conversation, telling the stories that matter alongside a world-class lineup of guests, experts and contributors. There's a merry band of erudite intellectuals who join us every evening. Michael Pinion.
We had a very interesting meeting with the Russian Orthodox Patriarch.
Zoe Strimple.
There is real unease.
And Peter Hitchens, to name a few.
This is war, for goodness sake. Nobody tells the truth about what's going on.
Kate Ferguson, tonight from 7 on Times Radio.
We're a nation mad about pets. We bake birthday cakes for cats, like dogs share our
Listen in the Times Radio app or wherever you get your podcasts. Across the UK, on DAB Digital Radio, on the free Times Radio app, and on your smart speaker, John Pienaar at Drive on Times Radio.
Here with me on Pienaar and Friends, Kate Ferguson from The Sun on Sunday and Mikey Smith from the Mirror. Let's talk about the story which has been rumbling through the week, Reform UK, and the idea of what to do about asylum seekers in this country now in significant numbers. How do you act on that? Well, it's now been called a crisis. Is it a crisis, Casey? And what do you make of what you heard today with Nigel Farage and that sort of backpedaling? Because I think it was that. Yeah, he's telling us today that he always was clear yesterday that women and children would be off the list for deportation. That wasn't clear to me yesterday. I don't know about you.
I watched the press conference yesterday, and when he was asked about that, if I remember rightly, he said they wouldn't be a priority, not in that first phase, but I don't think he said they would be off the list, and that's what he said today. I mean, speaking more broadly about Nigel Farage and this kind of quite like radical, bold, I mean, certainly, you know, he's come up with a plan, with a set of proposals that are far bigger and more sweeping than we've seen any other political leader do.
That includes Donald Trump, by the way. I think this is tougher than the Trump plan.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, just to recap very briefly, because I'm sure your listeners will be aware, but you're talking about quitting ECHR, tearing up the Human Rights Act, then you're talking about suspending the Refugee Convention. Then you're talking about basically arresting all illegal migrants that arrive, immediately detaining them, putting them into sort of detention camps, and deporting them either to home country or third country, or if neither of that's possible, potentially British territory. So that is a massive radical overhaul proposed of what we would be doing with illegal migrants. Now, I do think that with the British public, there is an appetite for quite radical reform. I think interestingly, I thought Nigel used the word fairness a lot in his press conference, and that's the key issue. A lot of people think it's just so unfair that these boatloads of mainly men are turning up, taking advantage of the system. That is not a fair and equitable process. That's not the right way of gaining asylum in this country. But, you know, it remains to be seen whether or not the British people back something as radical as building detention centres. Where do you build them? What do they look like? The reality is, if you're going to put a few thousand men in their 20s, 30s, 40s in one kind of detention centre, then that's going to have a really quite high level of security. Is that going to look like a prison? You know, these are the real questions.
It'll be effectively an open prison.
It'll be effectively a prison. These are
not even an open prison.
It's not an open prison, because the idea is that they can't leave. Yeah. So it would be so these are the really thorny reality issues that politicians are going to have to grapple with. But I think grapple with them they must, because Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves, in fact Cooper says we're going to move migrants out of hotels. Fine. Public want that. Local MPs want that, save money. Then what do? You move them into HMOs. This is basically houses where a bunch of migrants would live on people's streets in houses. Well, then you're going to find protests against that next. So there is a crucial, thorny question for whoever leads our country to really take on and answer. What do you do with illegal migrants when they are here?
Okay, before we get Mikey's thought, what do you make of the rewriting of the plan today? I mean, yesterday we had that impression about women and children, you know, not in the same boat necessarily as men, but they were still, you know, as it were, technically on the list. Now they're off the list. That's quite a significant refinement. Does that say this is just not been thought through? Maybe you're going to say it's a reaction to people's concerns about this, but I think it could be both of those things, actually, couldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, those, as I say, that migrant plan it's going to have to come with like a level of detail, which I don't think we've really seen yet.
By any means.
Nigel's firmed up totally, you're totally right. Overnight, today, he's totally firmed up that position that it wouldn't be women and children. Now, I think that is what the British public would agree with. Overwhelmingly, the concern is with young men arriving. People, if you ask people if they would want to give asylum to women and children, they would probably have a very different stance.
You're saying men, it's men. And on the policy as it sits now, that implies a lot of families being forced to break up, doesn't it? If you've got, let's say, here's a hypothesis. Let's say you are a family who have come across, maybe on those boats some years ago to this country from Afghanistan after that trip across the other continent, and you're being told, look, once an illegal, always an illegal. All of you, you are slated for the boat, except you guys, you're a woman, you're a child, not you. Does the mother of that child necessarily say, look, and it's a daughter, it's a girl, we're all going to go back with our my partner, my husband, her father, to Afghanistan, where she can't get a proper education, where we know the way women are treated there, worse than second-class citizens, or do I stay here and the family's broken up? Because that would be the dilemma, and that's it's not a pretty thing to put on the table.
I don't think any of this is pretty. I think you'll get lots and lots of dilemmas like this. But it is also true, isn't it, that there is not public support currently for these boats turning up. There is vast public support for stopping that. And you have to come up with laws that people abide by. And I guess the argument against that is that you need to create safe and legal routes potentially for those women, those children fleeing Afghanistan, but arriving here illegally cannot be tolerated, because once you do tolerate it, that's what happens. You get tens of thousands of people arriving here illegally. So it's not a nice policy situation to be faced with, but I am aware, as if all political leaders are aware, that British public tolerance for this is through the floor. And once you kind of lose the public buy-in for because they see illegal immigration as so out of control, you're going to lose their buy-in for even legal migration. It has to be seen as fair and equitable.
Mikey, tell me what you're thinking.
I don't think Nigel Farage was firming up his policy today. I think he was performing an enormous reverse ferret on a policy that wasn't thought through properly. I was listening very carefully and ran it back several times yesterday, and he said the words, yes, women and children will be detained. He said that in the press conference. It was clearly part of his plan, and I think what happened is that there was a backlash because people don't like the idea of locking up kids. And I think he performed a U-turn. Now, the big problem for Nigel Farage with this is another thing he said in that press conference yesterday was, this has got to be watertight. There can't be any loopholes. And if you allow women and children who are, let's not forget, 25% roughly of arrivals on small boats are women and children. So it's not no people, it's thousands of people. And if you say for 5 years you're not going to detain and deport those people, then that's a massive loophole in this policy. Now, I think there are a number of things. I'm absolutely certain that the British public want illegal migration to come down. I think there is absolutely an appetite for finding ways of doing that. I think there are a number of things in Nigel Farage's plan for which the public does not have an appetite, not least of which is the idea of paying the Taliban to take people away and torture them, which is what would end up happening.
Well, can we let's just take that on, which is a lot of people arriving here on boats say, I'm from Afghanistan. Now, the British government has to decide, do you just give carte blanche, say yes, 100% asylum to people from Afghanistan? Now, you're not explicitly saying, yes, here you go off and torture them, obviously, but it's clearly distasteful to want to do a deal with the Taliban in Afghanistan, given their horrific, brutal, medieval regime, and I'm not even going to go near to what they do to women. However, it's interesting, isn't it, that even Keir Starmer's spokesman yesterday said nothing's off the table there, because it is true. I mean, this is the reality. This is the horrible reality. You say it's not pretty, John. It's not pretty. The reality is, to really get these numbers down, you're going to have to send back people to Afghanistan, to Eritrea, to other countries like this. Germany's already sending people back to Afghanistan. This is what European countries are going to end up doing. And it's not nice and it's not pretty. But honestly, that's the reality, isn't it?
The government's messaging on this has been clear as mud, hasn't it? And was it yesterday we had a spokesman, someone in Number 10 who was briefing out that nothing was off the table when it came to deals with Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Then I saw some subsequent, elaboration of that. But it was said to mean that Keir Starmer had in mind that you could do deals with the Taliban when the Taliban is gone. That there needs to be a new regime in Afghanistan. Now, when on earth is that going to happen? That is a sometime, who knows, never policy.
Yeah, sure. But I mean, this is the reality, right, of the boat migrants, isn't it?
But all it's going to take is for this policy to be enacted, and then for the first person to be wrongly deported to Afghanistan and then be disappeared off the street and tortured and murdered, and for us to know that person's name.
I honestly think, Mike, how do you fix this borders problem? Because the danger is that you just defend the status quo. Nothing gets done. Whatever politician does that, I'm afraid you're kicked out of office next time.
Well, look, I have no doubt that Nigel Farage's plan would reduce the numbers of illegal migrants coming into this country. Also, another plan that would do the same job, would reduce those numbers, would be to station troops on the beaches and shoot everyone dead as they rocked up on the beach. I don't think either of them are particularly palatable to the British public.
I don't want to say this, but I think that's like an infantile and comparison. Because let's play the game when you're in Number 10 and you've got 5 years like Keir Starmer has, and he's had 1 year and the boat migrants have gone up. These are the decisions of office. These are the difficult decisions of government. These are not the rhetorical flourishes of the opposition. These are the tricky decisions of government. What do you do to stop illegal migrants coming to this country? The unpalatable truth is that you either do deals to deport them back to unsavoury countries because that's where they come from, and they've not come here legally, and you cannot give asylum to everyone that just gets on a boat here because there's no public support for it. And if there was public support for it, maybe you could do that. But there clearly isn't public support for it, let alone the money for it. You're pulling a face. Is there public support for it?
I'm saying if we had spent, or if the government had spent more time making the case for it, for us, being a place that doesn't send people to countries where they might be tortured, then there might be public support for it.
But might be tortured, what does that mean?
What does that mean? It means that...
But does it mean they have a case that's real, that they've proved, or is it just that they're from Afghanistan? In which case, you have opened the borders to millions.
We're going to have to move on. But on that question, what does the public think? There's actually a bit of a space where data and knowledge about what the public thinks exists. We know, for example, that most people, 7 out of 10 in the poll that we've all seen, think the government's not doing a good job. You could argue maybe it's surprising it's only 7 out of 10 because it's only half the question. One is you're not doing a good enough job. The next question is what do you do instead? And that's when you get into the murkier, muddier, cloudier territory. And we haven't seen some of the ideas now put out there by Reform UK, tested with the public. For example, the tough dilemmas that you're talking about there, which you suggest may be unavoidable, I'd like to see numbers on what the public think about that.
Agree.
Not just the idea of sending people to harsh regimes, but people who've already been accepted into this country being sent to harsh regimes. I want to know what the public think about that, and hopefully we may find out a bit more about that. I'm talking to Luke Trill tomorrow at about this time. But those numbers which you have not yet got are going to be so interesting. We're going to move on. In a minute after the news, we can hear from Kate Borsley, what she's doing after 7 o'clock. Then we're going to go stateside, the way we so often do, and talk to a former senior cabinet minister in a Trump administration about, the power hunger of the president when it comes to extending his reach around various institutions and parts of American politics and public administration. This is Pienaar Friends with Mikey Smith and Kate Ferguson, now at 6:34, which is a little late, forgive me for that, the news with Laura Cook.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Thank you. Good evening. 2 children aged 8 and 10 have been killed in a school shooting in the US city of Minneapolis. Police say the gunman who fired 3 weapons, including a rifle, through a church window while they were praying has died from a self-inflicted injury. 17 other people are hurt, including 14 children. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Fry says it was the first week of classes.
There are no words that can capture the horror and the evil of this unspeakable act. Children are dead. There are families that have a deceased child. You cannot put into words the gravity, the tragedy, or the absolute pain of this situation.
Energy bills are going up. Homes in England, Scotland and Wales can typically expect to pay around £35 more a year from October, with the advice being to fix. On day 2 of an asylum seeker's trial, a court heard he told a 14-year-old girl she'd be a good wife. Hadush Kabatu, who's 38, was living at the Bell Hotel in Epping in Essex. He denies the charges. The leader of the Conservative Party, Kemi Badenoch, says Nigel Farage is having difficulties with his immigration policy because he hasn't done the homework. In the last 24 hours, the Reform UK leader appears to have gone back on his policy on whether women and children would be deported under his government. And HSBC's mobile banking app is still down on payday for many people. The bank says it's dealing with it as a matter of urgency. And for a news bulletin when you want it, search for the Times News Briefing on the Times Radio app.
This is Times Radio. Across the UK, on DAB digital radio, on the free Times Radio app, and via your smart speaker. John Pienaar at Drive on Times Radio.
And with me here on Pienaar and Friends, Mikey Smith from the Mirror and Kate Ferguson from the Sun on Sunday. And we've been joined by Kate Borser, who's dropped by to tell us about her show, which kicks off at 7. Hey, Kate.
Thanks, John. A lot of different stories to cover this evening. We'll go live on the ground to Minneapolis, where that school shooting has taken place today, as you've been reporting. We'll also wrap up some of the main politics lines of the day as well. There is perhaps a little bit more to say on budget planning for Rachel Reeves. We'll be able to let our listeners in on that front page story at some point in the show. That's your first exclusive. There's another exclusive in our look at tomorrow's Times as well. It's a health story. We'll also take a look at Nigel Farage's backtrack on women and children. And Mikey, you're absolutely right. He did clearly say, in fact, I think I might have even run the clip in my show yesterday, that women and children would be involved with these immediate arrest and deportation plans. And that is not something that he wanted to stand by today at all. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I mean, there are lots of stories across several different media outlets, John, about what the government intends to do about migration. And again, it's this piecemeal approach by Labour. So today there's the story about how claims are going to be halved in time. So there's going to be, rather than a certain number of days per claim, that's going to be halved by the Home Office. There are incentives apparently for claim handlers to get decisions. That's a story running in another paper. £75 for every decision made within a certain time period. So we're hearing lots from Labour, but they're still not being able to resonate in a big maximalist way as Reform are, even if Nigel Farage isn't completely across his own brief on this one. It doesn't even matter if Reform intend to do half of what they say they're going to do. So we'll follow some of that up for you. We're also going to be speaking to a Danish MP and chair of the country's Defence Committee about this really intriguing story out of Greenland today, that Americans with ties to Donald Trump have carried out covert influence operations in Greenland, trying to gauge popularity for Donald Trump in his, absolutely serious intention to take over the country. I know you've been speaking about Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce. Well, Helen Rump, hello. Do you know what? Do you know what's really weird? Because I'm not of the Taylor Swift generation, and I know you're not either, John. And
neither am I, really.
Well, yeah, but I mean, you were speaking to Charlotte Ives earlier. I mean, this is part of culture, part of life. If you're a certain age, she's roundly appreciated. She's just interwoven into your life, whether you're a millennial or less.
How old is she?
35.
35.
You see, I love that. You instantly know the answer.
I read our front page. They're both 35.
You're absolutely of the Taylor Swift generation.
I'm a few years older, unfortunately.
Yeah, you're still. I mean,
I'm of her generation. Not really her listeners are a bit younger.
I get you. Yeah.
Well, Helen Rumbley for the Times writes a piece tomorrow. We're going to get a sneak peek at that, and she has called the wedding the royal wedding of millennial and Gen Z women's lives, albeit with catchier songs. So that is where she's putting the Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift wedding in terms of its importance. Edward Lucas joins us later. He's going to be giving us a peek at his column, which basically says Europe should stop being a spectator, stop being bossed around by other countries like the US, like China, and stand on its own 2 feet, or at least look like it is. And Adam Bolton joins us at 8:30. We're with Lord Robert Hayward, actually, the Conservative peer and pollster, to talk about that Times polling on how Labour is, they've dropped, haven't they, down to 20% in the YouGov Times Sky News Westminster voting intention poll, and just how strongly Reform are performing. 28%. I mean, you can't knock these figures, but also looking at Reform's dominance country by country as well, particularly in Wales, where those Senedd elections are less than 9 months away. So there's loads of variation tonight. And
there always is. That's UK at 7 o'clock, right after this. So look, here with me in the next 20 minutes, what remains of Pienaar and Friends, we've got Kate Ferguson, we've got Mikey Smith, and now we are joined on the line stateside by Chad Wolf, who's a former acting Secretary of Homeland Security during the President Trump's first term in office. And also he's Executive Director of the America First Policy Institute. Chad, welcome to you. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's good to have you. Can I just ask you about the big story in Minneapolis today? What are your thoughts on the school shooting? Maybe I should say the latest school shooting. Just how you feel about that, and what do you think it says on the issue of gun control?
Yeah, well, obviously it's a terrible tragedy. I think it's being reported right now that 2 children are dead and 15 or more are injured at the moment. We don't know a lot about the suspect, who I believe has taken his own life. So I think that's really the next step here, is to understand who this individual was, and how he came to that school that morning with those weapons. And so a lot of investigative work, to unfold over the next several days and weeks.
It is a truly awful story, and one can very easily empathise with the parents of those children. And you don't have to be a parent to feel that. Anyone surely must feel that really rather deeply on a day like this. And there's so little that can be said that hasn't already been said, Chatham, on the subject of gun control in the United States. In your country, there'll be a polarised argument again, I guess. There'll be, as you say, it makes the case for much stricter gun controls. We don't know the circumstances of this particular shooter, but that argument will again be amplified. And there'll be those who say it makes the case for more people to have guns, for teachers to have guns. People kill people. It's a very familiar argument. And what would be your contribution to that?
Well, no, I agree with you. It's a very familiar argument here in the States. You have two sides to the issue here. And that's what I'm saying. The investigative work continues, because you got to understand how this individual showed up to that place with those weapons in hand, whether he purchased them legally or not. What we know is more laws, if they're not enforced, more laws don't always solve the problem. So you really do have to unpack the situation here and understand how this individual came to that location with those weapons in hand, and if he bought them, if he stole them. What we often see in these types of incidents, unfortunately, is that they come from a family member of some kind, and needing to make sure that we hold those types of individuals accountable. If you're going to have a weapon here in the United States, which I do and millions of others do, you got to take a level of responsibility for that, making sure that they're safe, they're secure, and no one has access to them. So I think that's what's really important going forward. And there'll be that public policy debate on gun control, or the fact that there needs to be more armed retired law enforcement at maybe some of these schools, private, public, and elsewhere, that can properly protect them.
Okay, well, that is a foretaste. I say a foretaste, as you say, it's part of a continuing pattern of debate on after tragedies like this. So I'm going to move on. I do want to ask you now, if I may, about a story which is really just broken. This one is in the Washington Post. It concerns your own former department, Chad, the Homeland Security Department. And the reporting tells us, it says that the Department of Homeland Security is now barring states and volunteer groups that receive government funds from helping undocumented immigrants. And the implications of that it could be difficult for FEMA, the Federal Emergency Agency, to provide food or other forms of support to undocumented migrants that are caught up in disasters in America. And, of course, there have been disasters, floods, typhoons, and all of the rest of it. What's your immediate reaction to that report?
Yeah, I saw that. I think it just broke a couple of minutes ago.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to, obviously the details matter here, because exactly how FEMA, they contract with a number of aid organizations when a disaster hits, for instance, and exactly what they're able to do and what they're not able to do. It's spelled out in contracts. And yes. So I need to better understand what DHS is trying to do here. But I think overall what they're saying is, and I think this is a real concern that President Trump is concerned about as well, which is to say, if we're going to provide federal dollars to aid organizations, it's one thing to have them provide aid in the immediate aftermath, right? You're talking hours, maybe even days after an immediate incident that occurs. But 2 months, 3 months, 4 months later, I think the administration has made it very clear that they do not want federal dollars, taxpayer dollars, going towards helping folks who chose to break the law and come to the United States illegally, help them benefit one way or another. So again, a lot of details to work out here, but I think that's their overall concern.
Yeah, I mean, so you would, without looking at the detail or having the detail, imagine that we're not talking about agencies refusing to help someone who's up to their neck in water after a flood, or under rubble after a building collapse, and asking whether or not they are documented in the United States. You just say when it comes to other longer term support, but that could include food, it could include other forms of support which is presently available to migrants with or without documentation. In which case, it looks like a pretty harsh measure.
I don't know that it does. I mean, again, I think it's harsh if you look at it through the lens of, well, we've never done that before, right? And I think that's what the Washington Post story talks about, which is, well, in the history of DHS, which is a little bit over 23, 24 years old, they've never done that before. But that, that doesn't say that's the way it should be done. I think, and again, the American people went to the ballot box last November, and they chose President Trump because we had a border crisis out of control during the 4 years of President Biden. And you saw millions, if not billions, of taxpayer dollars going to help non-citizens while U.S. citizens suffered throughout the country. So, look, I think a historic crisis during the Biden administration requires a historic response. Yeah. I think that's what you see from the Trump administration.
Okay, interesting to see what our listeners make of that. Send us a text, send us a tweet, join in the conversation. It's good to have you here with us, Chad. I want to ask you on a broader front. I'm bringing Kate and Mikey on this. Do you accept that the president is now pushing the boundaries of presidential power, well, certainly in a way that we haven't seen in modern times? It's obviously upset his critics. I spoke to Joe Walsh. You'll know of Joe Walsh. He's a former Republican, now a very, anti-Trump, a Democrat. He told me that he felt there was a fascist in the White House. I'm not going to ask if you reject that claim, because obviously you will totally reject that claim. But do you believe there's now a president who leads as Donald Trump leads, and for that reason likely to be described as an authoritarian? And if you do, is that, in your view, necessarily a bad thing?
Well, I've certainly heard, particularly the mainstream media and those on the left here in the United States talk about that. I mean, you've seen words authoritarianism, dictator. You've seen all these things thrown around. Is President Trump using his executive authority? Absolutely. Did President Biden use his executive authority? Absolutely. For different ways, right? And for different policy goals and aims. So there's no doubt that that's occurring. But as I look across the board here and I look at what President Trump and his team are doing, a lot of it just it makes common sense. Now, has it been done before? No. You know, deploying troops to D.C. has been done before, so let's just be clear about that. But the manner, you know, maybe it hasn't, but that's not to say that it shouldn't. I mean, D.C. has a out of control crime problem. I've heard commentators say, well, it's down in you know, recent highs, but it's been historically high, and even a decrease, it's still historically high. So,
but just on that, Chad, I mean, there is a deep disagreement about that. I mean, DC's police crime figures say it's the lowest level of violent crime in 30 years, as well as murder having declined steeply over the past 2 years. They claim that view is simply wrong, that it's a pretext for the militarization of the capital. Well, what I would say is, other than probably a 15-day period earlier this year, I mean, you have shootings every day, right? And so you can look at stats, and I can probably find any stat that will make an argument one way or another. But, you know, I work in D.C. I do not live here, but I do come in and out of the city. There are elements of the city that you do not want to be in after dark. It's just the reality of it. And that's the way in big cities across the United States, and I would say across the world, there are probably, and I think what President Trump is saying is that, you know, D.C. is the welcoming mat to the United States. A lot of people visit here first and then go off to other places. And he's just saying, you know, enough is enough. And it's really, whether it's this issue, whether it's the border, whether it's a variety of others, I think it's interesting because I think the American people want a president that's actually going to roll up his sleeves and say, let's tackle some of these hard problems. You may disagree with him on how he's tackling that, but the mayor of D.C. has sit back and watched her city just be riddled with crime for some period of time and actually reducing the number of police, and it's not working. And so I think he's saying, look, there's a better solution here. And if the local, in this case, the mayor is not going to step up and do her job, then I will. Well, my presumption is that America is about as polarized as a country can get. And when we talk about what the American people believe, you've got to assume that, and remember how divided Americans are, and it shows in all the opinion polls. I've got with me here Kate Ferguson and Mikey Smith. Chad, Kate.
Chad, hi, it's Kate Ferguson here at The Sun. I just wanted to ask, I was reading today on the news websites that Trump's planning to deploy troops to Chicago next, it sounds like, rolling out of the DC thing to other big cities in America. Do you think there's public support for that? And why do you think he's picking certain areas? What's guiding where he's picking, do you think?
Well, I think if you look as far as the public support kind of, I think if you got to, depends on where you look, right? I think if you go to Chicago and would probably poll Chicago residents, he probably doesn't. And that's largely because President Trump is not popular in Chicago. He's not popular in a lot of these big cities because it's mostly Democratic run and controlled. But I think overall, I think most Americans would say, I'm concerned about the crime in Chicago. I would say most residents of Chicago would say, I'm concerned about the crime in Chicago. They may disagree on what to do about it. But when you have the mayor of Chicago, who was just asked yesterday by media here in the United States, that said, can you use more police officers in the city of Chicago? Let's put aside National Guard. Let's put aside what President Trump wants to do. Can you use more police officers because you have a crime problem in Chicago? He would not answer that question. He basically said, no, we're good as is. And so I think most residents are looking and saying, well, that's just not right, because we've got shootings and we've got murders almost on a daily basis in Chicago.
Okay. Mikey Smith.
You need something, you need a different solution there.
Mikey.
Following on from that, it's Mikey Smith from the Mirror here. Kate asked why certain places. I'm going to ask why not certain places. So Donald Trump has gone for DC, which votes roughly 85% Democrat. Chicago next, about 80% Democrat. New York is another city that he's mentioned wanting to send troops to. But the city with the highest murder rate in the country is New Orleans, which is in Louisiana, which is a Republican-run state. Why do you think he hasn't suggested sending
Democratic mayor of New Orleans, Democratic mayor of New Orleans, Democratic mayor of a lot of these cities who are either soft on crime, endorse cashless bail, endorse, different policing options here. And I think that's why you see city after city. It's not a matter of are they in blue states or red states. It's who is running the city. And by and large, not exclusively, but by and large, a lot of these cities are being run by Democratic mayors that do not have their best interest of their constituents in mind and are not deploying their police and making sure that there's zero tolerance for that type of crime in those communities.
All right. Before you go, and again, thank you for joining us, Chad. Another example of what is described by critics as being overreach by the White House. The president announcing that he's firing Lisa Cook, of course, the governor on the Federal Reserve. The president does not like the way the Federal Reserve does business. He wants lower interest rates. They say they're guarding the dollar, and this is now being described by a lot of media in America. You would say the mainstream liberal outlets, sure, but also, the more conservative Wall Street Journal. They called it a calculated putsch. That is the interpretation that's now being widely put on this. Chad, it's difficult to argue against. This is a real bit of a power grab, isn't it?
Well, I don't think there's any doubt that the president's very unhappy with the Fed at the moment.
But it's an independent body, and he wants to stop that.
It is. Now, he has the ability to remove individuals for cause. I mean, that's a power that is granted to him. So if individuals or I should say members of Congress and others say, well, it's an independent body and he shouldn't be able to remove anyone at any time for that, well, then they need to rewrite the law, or they need to understand what the law is. Now, I'm sure there's going to be a lawsuit on what is cause, right? And what are the grounds of that in order for him to take those actions. And that's likely going to play out in court. But, if what she's accused of is rings true, I think there's a very strong case that she should not be in the position that she is currently in.
And that will be fought through. And grateful to you for joining us, Chad, and joining in our conversation. Chad Wolf there, formerly of Donald Trump's Homeland Security Department. Just more in the last few minutes of my programme here with Kate Ferguson and Mikey Smith. I'm John Pienaar, and this is Pienaar and Friends on Times Radio.
Times Radio.
Whoever finds this letter, my car broke down. There is nothing nearby, and they've already eaten my... Please tell my wife that I love her, and that she was right. This jacket isn't waterproof. Signed, Daniel S. Oh, actually, scrap that. Greenplane's just arrived. Blimey, less than an hour.
Local rescue, nationwide. Nothing beats near. Green flag.
On average, we get to breakdowns in under an hour based on app and phone call-outs combined between July 24 and June 25.
By river, ocean and expedition, you can now explore all 7 continents with Viking. Start planning your journey today and discover for yourself why Viking was named Best River Cruise Operator and Best Luxury Ocean Cruise Operator at the 2024 Times and Sunday Times Travel Awards. Viking, exploring the world in comfort. Learn more at Viking.com.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. John Pienaar at Drive on Times Radio.
So just time for a couple of closing thoughts before we wrap up for this evening with Mikey Smith and Kate Ferguson. We had quite a pretty wide-ranging conversation there with a former secretary at the Homeland Security Department in the United States. And we touched pretty heavily on the question of Donald Trump just extending his reach, tightening his grip, including on institutions that are not by tradition, and some say by law and the Constitution, his bailiwick. What are your thoughts on that from all you've heard, Mikey?
So, I mean, my thoughts on this are there's the way you can tell he's overreaching is that he's having to juice the numbers in order to make his case, and I think you can tell that that's not washing with the public by my favourite story of today, which is the fella who threw a Subway sandwich at a law enforcement officer in protests the other day, and they went after him for federal assault, and they couldn't get it through a prosecution because the grand jury said no.